Ed Henry here tonight with the tale of potentially 2 special counsels. What can you tell us, Ed?
Good to see you, Shannon. That's right. Republicans tonight gaining momentum in their effort to get a second special counsel. They want the Attorney General Jeff Sessions to appoint that second special counsel beyond Robert Mueller to investigate abuses at the FBI and the Justice Department. And tonight they have now the support of 2 of the top 3 Republican leaders in the House, Kevin McCarthy as well as Steve Scalise. And that is just the kind of move that may rally the conservative base ahead of the midterms. And it comes as House Republicans got a major boost tonight from President Trump in their uphill campaign to keep control of Congress. He headlined a fundraiser here in Washington that raised a record $32 million. He fired up the base by vowing the GOP will defy the odds like they did in 2016 and win this campaign cycle, taking aim at Congresswoman Maxine Waters, calling her a, quote, low IQ individual, and declaring she and other Democrats have such a radical agenda that if they win the House, they will impeach him, whether the facts support it or not.
We will impeach him. We will impeach him. But he hasn't done anything wrong. It doesn't matter. We will impeach him. This is what we're going to have. This is what we're going to have to fight against.
As for the first special counsel probe, Robert Mueller's investigation, Republicans in the House and Senate are largely standing behind the president. Speaker Paul Ryan today telling our own Jennifer Griffin he has been assured that Mueller will not be fired, so there is no need to pass legislation in the days ahead, ensuring that he keeps his job. So he thinks, Ryan does, that Democrats should back off fanning those flames right now. Watch.
You said today that you had assurances that Special Counsel Mueller would not be fired. Who gave you those assurances?
I'll just leave it at the administration.
Did the president
I'll
give
just
you
leave it at that.
assurances?
I want to keep private conversations private.
But you feel
I have received.
certain.
I do. I have received assurances that there's not even a consideration of firing the special
Why not
counsel.
protect the Special Counsel in the omnibus?
Because I don't think it's necessary at this time. We have assurances that they're not even considering it, so there's no point of it.
Now, Republican Senator Rand Paul, meanwhile, said this whole question of whether Mueller will be fired is a distraction from the fact that FBI officials were, in fact, out to get the president. Paul saying the FBI used to be seen as impartial policemen, but now, from Andrew McCabe to Peter Strzok, they politicized the Russian investigation. Shannon?
All right, Ed Henry, live for us tonight. Thank you. Well, Congress also working late tonight on a $1.3 trillion omnibus spending bill under added pressure because of both a looming snowstorm here on the East Coast and yet another potential government shutdown could come Friday at midnight. Conservatives like Congressman Jim Jordan not happy with the direction the talks are taking.
Spending money on things like Planned Parenthood, spending potentially money on insurance company bailouts and the Obamacare exchange, but not spending money to build the border security wall. That's probably the biggest problem with this legislation.
All right, we are joined now by our Capitol Hill guru, producer Chad Pergram. All right, so Chad, at this moment, unless you've gotten something new in the last 10 minutes, we're still waiting on a text for this bill.
Yeah,
so what do we know?
We are still waiting for the actual bill text. We were hearing that it could be filed last week. The reason it's so important for House Republicans to file this here on calendar day Tuesday is they have something called the parts of 3-day rule. They often call it the 3-day rule. What it really is the 24-hour and 2-second rule. They want to give their members parts of 3 days to review the legislation. So they file the text tonight. They go to the Rules Committee tomorrow to prep the bill for the floor. They also have to whip it to see what the vote tally is, and then put it on the floor on Thursday, maybe have the Senate process it Friday. You see how tight this is if the deadline is 59 p.m. on Friday. That could be an issue with the snowstorm tomorrow if they're having trouble getting staff in. But here we are at about a half hour or so before midnight, and we still don't have bill text. And not long before I came on the air, I was told that there was no consideration whatsoever to write an interim spending bill, something to get them over the weekend. Congress is supposed to leave for a 2-week recess for Easter and Passover on Friday. And you might remember in February, Rand Paul, the Republican senator from Kentucky, he single-handedly shut down the government for the overnight hours, about 4 or 5 hours, because he dragged things out in the Senate. You can do that. And if you're not getting that piece of paperwork to the Senate until Friday, that's why it could drag out into Saturday or Sunday. And keep in mind, Shannon, that a lot of Republicans don't want to be here over the weekend. The reason, well, we're supposed to have about 500,000 people, high school kids mostly, come to Washington to protest firearms, and they don't want to be in town when that happens.
Yeah, and they'd be right in the middle of it downtown, trying to get in and out of their offices there on Capitol Hill. All right, Ted, thank you for giving us the lay of the land. We'll stand by and wait for your expertise on what happens next.
Anytime.
Thank you. All right, up next, the Supreme Court hears a free speech case involving pro-life pregnancy centers. Can they be forced to tell clients where they can go to get free abortions? Governor Mike Huckabee looks at the wide-ranging implications of what the justices heard today and more. He joins us live. And stick around for Stormy Daniels' attorney. He's here to tell her side of the story about why she's speaking out despite an key House seat where some on the left are actually trying to unseat an incumbent Democrat because he happens to be pro-life. Mike Tobin is tracking all the primaries and results tonight. Joins us live with the latest from the Windy City. Good evening, Mike.
And it's still too close to call, but Governor Rauner, the incumbent, the wealthy businessman, just gave his victory speech here in Chicago. But you can't escape the fact that he had a very tight race. The challenger, a very conservative state representative, Jeannie Ives, really gave him a run for the money, and that is because Governor Rauner had a tough first year. He was beat in a budget standoff. His promise for tax cuts ultimately resulted in a tax hike. He signed what was called the Trust Act. Critics called it the Sanctuary State Bill, and he expanded taxpayer funding of abortions. So the conservative base was very upset with him. That was the protest vote that went over to Jeannie Ives, the state representative who challenged him. What we heard from Governor Rauner here in this, what he called a victory speech, is that I heard you. And that's going to be an interesting challenge for him going forward because he is going to need to galvanize the conservative base here in Illinois and the Republican base before he faces off what we now know will be J.B. Pritzker, the billionaire heir to the Hyatt Hotels fortune. He had a lot of negatives in this campaign, not the least of which was being caught on tape with the now imprisoned former Governor Rod Blagojevich, among other things using racially insensitive language. The Chicago Tribune reported that Pritzker hid money overseas to avoid paying taxes. He overcame it simply by overwhelming the airways and the campaigns with money. So the general election is now shaping up to be the battle of the rich guys. Number one beneficiaries looks like it will be the local television stations. Shannon?
Okay, so tell us more about this neck-and-neck race for the congressional district. How's that shaping up tonight?
That one still can't be called. At last check, they were separated by 1 percentage point. And that is the incumbent who has held that seat since 2005, Dan Lipinski. He is being challenged by the Democratic Party because he has shown up that he is not pro-life. He voted against the Affordable Care Act. Marie Newman came on the scene and positioned herself as the more progressive choice for Democratic voters. Outside money flowed in. She got a lot of support. She led at different points throughout the evening. Outside money flowed in to the tune of millions of dollars for a congressional seat. So we'll see how that one shapes up. It's still too close to call, and it really sets a stage for the future of the Democratic Party, what voters are going to choose there. Shannon?
It sure does. All right, Mike Tobin live for us in Chicago. Thank you very much. Now, that Chicago race, not the only showdown touching on the hot-button issue of abortion today. The Supreme Court hearing a dispute over a California law that forces most pro-life crisis pregnancy centers to provide information to clients about where they can go to find low or no-cost abortions. Mike Huckabee, former Republican governor of Arkansas and a Fox News contributor, joins us live today. And good to see you, Governor.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Good to be with you.
What do you, as somebody who has led a state that probably has different positions than California does on this, what do you make of this case today? It was a very interesting argument.
Well, it was a very powerful moment because the Supreme Court's most liberal justices had to just admit that this was a ridiculous law that California had passed that was very punitive toward the pro-life pregnancy centers. To say that if you're a pregnancy center primarily designed to save a human life and you have to tell people how to kill a human life, to make you do that, it's like saying that Weight Watchers has to tell people how to overeat in case they'd really rather have that option. I mean, it's that absurd. And the most liberal justices, including Kagan and Sotomayor and others, all, Ginsburg even, recognized and pretty well said this doesn't make sense. So I think that this law is going to be struck down. I can't imagine how it would stay. But here's the bigger question that at some point the Supreme Court is going to have to address. Is that unborn child a human being or not? If it is a person, and quite frankly, what we didn't know in 1973 so well, we know now, it is a person. And that person has a right to due process under the Constitution. And we really ought to be rethinking the whole idea of taking a perfectly healthy unborn child or any child without due process.
Yeah, they didn't get to that today, but they did talk a lot about these clinics. Justice Alito did note that it appears, he cited this statistic, that this law, the way it's narrowly tailored, it's got all kinds of carve-outs for different medical providers and facilities, that it ends up 98.5% of the clinics who are subjected to this law are the nonprofit pro-life crisis pregnancy centers. He said that seems a little bit suspicious that that's how this worked out. I want to play a soundbite from pro-choice leader Elise Hogue. She leads NARAL. This is why she said California has passed this law.
Women deserve fair and accurate information. I think that the justices interrogated and the state of California made the case that these fake women's health centers cannot operate without being dependent on lies and deception to get women through their doors.
So, you know, the argument is that women aren't getting the full picture when they go into these crisis pregnancy centers. I mean, she said it's about lies and deception. Even Justice Ginsburg today said, why shouldn't women be informed, whatever clinic they walk into, about the full range of options?
Well, I'll tell you where the lies are coming from the abortion clinics. That's a big business. Millions and millions of dollars are being made by the destruction of innocent human life. What they're not telling is that there is a heartbeat in that baby somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. Most people don't know they're pregnant then. And there's already a heartbeat. Should we be killing a human being with a heartbeat just because it's big business for someone? That's what is not being told. And this idea that it's all about women's health, this has a detrimental effect on health of women, both physically and emotionally. And I tried to say so many times that there's two victims in every abortion. One is the baby, and the other is that birth mother who may have been talked into this by some provider because it's good business for them, maybe by a boyfriend, a husband, a mother, a grandmother, or a good friend. But they're not telling them the full picture, either of what this is doing to them physically or emotionally for the short as well as for the long term.
Well, without weighing into that question today, the justices are going to look at whether this free speech issue, where you can force somebody who has a position the state doesn't agree with to endorse something else that they don't agree with. We'll see. It's a big free speech case. The underlying issue there, of course, abortion as well. We'll have a decision by June. Governor, thank you very much for weighing in tonight. Great to see you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Well, is Stormy Daniels in violation of a non-disclosure agreement? Has she been contacted by special counsel? Results today of a 2011 polygraph test, which could hold some clues into her alleged affair with President Trump. Her attorney, Michael Avenatti, will join us in just a minute. But first, Ellison Barber's here with the latest on Daniels, as well as suits from 2 other women against the president. Ellison.
Good evening, Shannon. The polygraph results say Stormy Daniels was likely telling the truth about having sex with Mr. Trump, and, quote, the probability of deception was measured to be less than 1%. Daniels' attorney released this photo along with the polygraph results and an affidavit signed by the person who administered it. Polygraphs are not typically admissible in court, in part because of doubt about their reliability. Daniels says she began sleeping with Trump in 2006. In court documents, Daniels claims she wanted to talk about her relationship with the now president after that infamous Access Hollywood tape surfaced during the 2016 campaign. And that's when Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, stepped in and a $130,000 hush agreement happened. Cohen admits to the payment but says Daniels' claims of an affair are false. In a couple of court filings last week, Trump lawyers accused Daniels of violating the non-disclosure agreement more than 20 times. And as a result, they say she owes at least $20 million in damages.
Why not let her come forward?
It's important to every single person that enters into a non-disclosure agreement. People do this. People do this in order to avoid litigation and avoid the embarrassment to family, to business, to reputation.
Karen McDougal, a former Playboy model who claims she had a 10-month affair with Mr. Trump in 2006 and 2007, filed suit in California today asking to be released from a hush agreement of her own. Summer Servos, a former contestant on The Apprentice, accused Mr. Trump of sexual assault. A judge in New York ruled today that a defamation lawsuit she filed against him could move ahead. As for Daniels, her attorney says his client's story isn't simply about an alleged consensual affair.
There's the act, and there's the cover-up.
Was she threatened physical harm?
Yes.
Will you deny that the President of the United States threatened your client?
I will not confirm or deny.
Reporters asked White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders about the alleged threats against Ms. Daniels at the daily briefing on Friday. Sanders said she had, quote, no knowledge of that situation. Shannon?
All right, Ellison Barber, thank you very much. Joining me now, Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti. Great to have you with us tonight, sir.
Thanks for having me, Shannon. Really appreciate it. A GoFundMe page. It's actually not on the GoFundMe page. It's a crowd justice page in an effort to raise money. But other than that, no one.
Well, you know, a lot of folks have questions about why now, why this is coming to light, why if it happened 10 years ago or more when the president wasn't the president, why it's grabbing so many headlines. Let me ask you about this. On your own website, you say that while in college and later in law school, Michael worked at a political opposition research and media firm run by Rahm Emanuel, who later, of course, became White House Chief of Staff. Presently the mayor of Chicago. During his time there, Michael worked on over 150 campaigns in 42 states, including multiple gubernatorial and congressional campaigns, including Joe Biden's U.S. Senate campaign. Is any of this political in nature for you?
Absolutely not. That was 25 years ago, and it's laughable that people are pointing to that as the reason behind this. I haven't spoken to Rahm Emanuel since January 2nd or 3rd, 2007. Now, why do I know that? Because I ran into him in the Rio airport after coming back from a holiday for New Year's down in Brazil back in 07. I haven't emailed him, texted him, communicated with him. I haven't had any communication with Joe Biden or anyone else on the left. The idea that this is politically motivated is laughable. This is about a search for the truth. I don't care if you're on the right, the left, or in the center. You deserve to know the facts. That's what this is about, period.
Okay, your client, Ms. Clifford, her real name, we all refer to her as Stormy Daniels, but Stephanie Clifford, in the non-disclosure agreement, I know that there's a lot of language there talking about the fact that part of the deal that she apparently agreed to at the time, whether it's valid or not, as you now contest, it talks about a lot of tangible property. It talks about potential text messages, still images, all those kinds of things. And part of the deal was that she would make sure all of it was turned over to the relevant counsel or it was destroyed. Does she still now maintain any of those materials? Does she plan to go public with any of those?
I'm not going to answer that question. That's a question for her. But what I will say is this. There was never any deal because the parties to the deal did not execute the agreement. Your viewers know that if there's a written contract, if everybody doesn't sign it, there's no deal. And in this situation, everybody did not sign the deal. Donald Trump never signed the deal. And there was consideration that my client was to receive beyond the $130,000, consideration that only Donald Trump could provide. A release of claims, an agreement to stay away from her and her family. The list goes on and on. This deal will never be upheld in a court of law. There was never any deal.
Okay, a couple of things. You and I both know, we learned in the first year of law school, that there are contracts, and courts do this all the time, that uphold things that aren't fully signed. You know that happens. I know that happens. But let's point out the language here so that we can talk about that. In this deal that was signed October 28th, 2016, the first part of it says, this settlement agreement and mutual release is made and deemed effective as of 28th day of October 2016 by and between EC LLC, which is the company that Michael Cohen set up, and or David Dennison on the one part, grouping them together, and Peggy Peterson on the other parts. Now, I know that you've talked about that and or language, but it sounds like, you know, in the clause right after that saying on the one part that they were a pocket deal. Cohen signed this deal. So how does that not satisfy the fact that both sides, both parties of this agreement have signed it?
Well, first of all, under California law, and or is a conjunctive term. It's a plural term under the law. But it's even simpler than that. It's basic English. If, in fact, the intent of Mr. Cohen was that the agreement could be entered into either by EC LLC or Donald Trump, he inverted the names. He got it wrong.
But the word or is used.
No, but no, it's simple.
Used.
It is used, but that's not the reading of the English language. He inverted the names. If he wanted it to be that EC could enter into it without Donald Trump, EC needed to be the second name, not the first name. And I mean, it's simple English. And regardless, Section 8.6 of the agreement required all parties to sign, all parties. This agreement's going to be thrown out. It's full of holes. It's poorly drafted. It has all kinds of superfluous language. I don't know who drafted this in Mr. Cohen's office, but whoever did it did a terrible job and certainly did not serve Mr. Trump well.
You mentioned the issue of consideration, so let's talk about that. It details that you are to be paid, and then when all of the conditions are satisfied, ultimately the money would go to your client. It was wired to you. Did you write her a check?
No, it was not wired to me. This was her predecessor counsel, to be clear.
Okay.
My client was to receive $130,000 and a whole host of other consideration from Mr. Trump.
Did she
not
receive
Mr.
the money?
Cohen. She received the money, but she didn't get the rest of the consideration. It's like buying a house, a 4-bedroom house, but you only get 1 bedroom. That's not a deal.
What didn't she receive?
Well, she didn't get the release from Mr. Trump as provided for in the agreement. She didn't get the agreement by Mr. Trump to stay away from her and her family and not contact her.
So
she didn't get a whole host of other things.
When did he contact her or her family?
No, that's not the issue. The issue is the agreement, the binding agreement for him not to do so. That's the consideration. She didn't get the binding release in the agreement. Mr. Cohen could not bind Mr. Trump under the agreement. This is going to be thrown out. There was no agreement. It's just that clear.
Well, it's not that clear because we have the word "or" there, and talking about them being in one part. I know you filed in state court. The Trump folks are trying to move this to federal court. We'll see if that succeeds. We'll see if a judge likes your argument or if you get a different judge. I know this isn't the first time that you faced off against the president in court. You did so, at least with a settlement in 2006 with regard to The Apprentice. So you are at least experienced in facing him in another legal fight. So we'll watch this one and see how it proceeds. But we're glad to have you with us tonight. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Michael.
Have a good night.
That's new information there. Meanwhile, in Maryland today, a high school shooter was stopped by an armed resource officer who's being hailed as a hero. 2 students were shot. 1 is in critical condition, and the gunman was fatally wounded.
When the shooting took place, our school resource officer, who was stationed inside the school, was alerted to the event and the shots being fired. He pursued the shooter, engaged the shooter, during which that engagement he fired a round at the shooter.
Let's bring in tonight's panel to talk about it. Fox News contributor and radio show host Richard Fowler, Guy Benson, the townhall.com political editor, also a Fox News contributor, and Chris Plante, syndicated radio talk show host. These guys know how to talk. We're glad you're here tonight. Thank you for joining us. This was a rude awakening for a lot of people. I heard about it on my commute in this morning. You know, it captured a lot of attention, and right away, Chris, people wonder how bad is this going to be, how many kids are affected, how many teachers, and it looks like the armed officer there in the school did what he was trained to do when the moment of truth came.
Right. You know, this is how it's supposed to work. You have a police officer on site. Shooting begins. The police officer responds. He engages the suspect. He fires his weapon if necessary. He puts an end to the situation. And look, it's not even clear that the police officer, we believe he fired 1 shot, I think, based on initial reports. It's not even clear that he hit the suspect or the suspect may have killed himself. Nevertheless, it was the police officer that put an end to it.
Well, and we heard from Joy Ann Reid over on MSNBC today. She tweeted this, worth noting, you're already laughing, haven't read the tweet yet.
Yeah.
She said, worth noting that if the NRA had its way, that student who shot 2 people at his Maryland school would have had access to an AR-15, not just a handgun. Imagine how much more carnage could have been unleashed and the disadvantage that SRO would have been at. Guy, my understanding is that under Maryland law, he couldn't legally, under 21, own that handgun either.
And yet he had one and committed a crime with it because criminals don't follow laws. This is just how the world works. So I think trying to attack the NRA, this is their default setting, is attack the NRA. If Joy Reid had her way, there would be no one there to protect the children from a bad guy with a gun. Right. After Parkland, what we saw was a lot of people laughing at this notion of good guy with a gun, stopping crimes, putting an end to potential massacres, because you had that cowardly deputy standing outside with shots ringing out on the inside, not doing his job. This guy did his job. He ended it on the spot. A good guy with a gun killed. The one fatality is the bad guy with a gun, saving potentially who knows how many students' lives. Thank God that happened, and thank goodness this armed, trained officer was there with a firearm.
Well, and as Chris said, we don't know yet if it was his shot that took down the student, but certainly the engagement caused whatever led to the student's death. Right. Richard, there's a lot of debate about whether or not to arm teachers and all kinds of different, you know, gun limitations and restrictions and additions in certain places. A lot of talk about schools being gun-free zones. Do you think there's agreement that for people like this who are trained law enforcement officials, it's the right thing to have them armed in schools?
I think there is agreement on this one, and my whole entire elementary K-12 career, there was a school resource officer at my school that was armed and prepared to deal with individuals like this, but also they were there to make sure that there was a better relationship between the community and the police department. So I think there is a place for school resource officers. With that being said, the ideal of arming teachers is not the way to go. I'm perfectly okay with having more police officers. I'm perfectly okay with fortifying or strengthening soft targets like schools and malls and stadiums. But with that being said, there has to be some middle ground. And the middle ground here is it's a bad idea to give a teacher in a classroom a gun. Period.
A lot of them don't want to do it. Some of them do want to do it.
60% of teachers think it's a bad idea, and a majority of parents feel the same way.
No one should be forced.
40% don't.
Right, that's the thing. They shouldn't force any teachers to have guns.
We're not looking to make anything mandatory.
Right, I think if there's a teacher, for example, that has, let's say, a law enforcement background or a military background, I think that person goes to the front of the line as someone who gets trained to be prepared to respond.
But think about the drawbacks to having a gun in the classroom. That means the students know where the gun is. That means other individuals in the school building know where the gun is, and it creates problems.
No, it hasn't created problems. It doesn't create problems.
Well, we don't know
it's
that.
a concealed. It would be a concealed weapon. The key word is concealed.
There are schools. I know in Texas and Colorado, there are a few school districts, and I'm sure there are many other places. You can tweet me and tell me where, but there are some and where teachers have agreed that they voluntarily want to take part in that.
That's right. It's already happening in Texas. And again, we're not talking about taking teachers and forcing them to train with pistols and become competent law enforcement officers. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are comfortable around weapons, that perhaps already have concealed carry permits, who are willing to undertake additional training and be another line of defense in a dangerous world.
And by the way, the notion, going back to the other network host tweet, the notion that a trained law enforcement professional with a handgun would be at such an unbelievable disadvantage against a student with a long gun, that doesn't check out either.
Well, I want to push back on that, because let's talk about the Las Vegas shooter, for example, who had more weapons, enough weapons to blow up the Taliban. He outmassed all those police in Las Vegas, and it was tragedy all over the place.
That's a completely different scenario.
But there's tons of scenarios where you have times there's tons of scenarios. Even in Parkland, this shooter could have outgunned that
And by the way,
officer.
can I just say the report that the sheriff's deputy was sleeping in his car outside of Parkland this week? I mean, you think that'd be the safest school in the world right now?
This week, you think you'd stay awake.
Yeah.
First week on the job, stay awake.
Gotta leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you. And you were gentlemen. And you did talk very well. After a long time. All right, more news next. Flipped it back over. They got the guy out in time. The driver was rescued, not seriously injured. Bravo to them. Thanks for watching us tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow night in Washington.